School bullies target the new kid, unaware he's a national Jiu-Jitsu champion. The fluorescent lights of Westlake High School buzzed overhead as Ethan Chen walked through the unfamiliar hallways, his shoulders hunched and eyes downcast. At 15, he was already used to being the new kid. His father's job had moved them 3 times in the past 5 years. But that didn't make it any easier, especially mid-semester when friend groups were already solidified like concrete. Ethan was slender, with a quiet demeanor that seemed to scream, "easy target," to the predators that roamed every high school's ecosystem. His oversized hoodie hung from his frame, and his dark hair fell slightly over his eyes, as if providing an additional barrier between him and the world. He wasn't particularly small, standing at 5'8", but there was something about his gentle movements and reluctance to make eye contact that made him seem smaller than he was. What no one at Westlake High knew, what no one could possibly guess, was that behind Ethan's unassuming exterior lay years of disciplined training. Back in California before the move, Ethan had been a national junior jiu-jitsu champion, training 6 days a week under his grandfather, a former champion himself. The medals and trophies were packed away in boxes still waiting to be unpacked in their new home. His father had suggested he mention it to make friends, but Ethan had refused. "I just want to be normal this time. No expectations, no pressure." It took less than a week for Ethan to appear on Blake Donovan's radar. Blake was a junior, captain of the wrestling team, with broad shoulders and a perpetual smirk that seemed to intensify whenever he spotted weakness. His 2 shadows, Trent and Cooper, followed him everywhere, amplifying his every joke and backing his every move. "Hey, new kid!" Blake's voice boomed down the hallway during passing period on Ethan's 4th day. "What's with the backpack? You carrying your whole life in there?" Ethan kept walking, eyes forward. "Just ignore it. Don't engage." Blake stepped directly into Ethan's path, Trent and Cooper flanking him like loyal guard dogs. "I'm talking to you, China boy." "I'm Korean American," Ethan said quietly, still not meeting Blake's eyes. "Excuse me, I need to get to class." Blake's hand shot out, grabbing the strap of Ethan's backpack. "What's the rush? We're just getting to know each other." With a quick yank, the backpack slipped from Ethan's shoulder, spilling books and notebooks across the hallway floor. Students stepped around the mess, a few glancing with sympathy, but none stopping to help. Mr. Harrington, the history teacher, looked over from his doorway but merely called out, "Get to class, everyone." The bell rings in 1 minute. Ethan knelt to gather his things, his face burning with humiliation, but his hands steady. "Breathe in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, just like Grandpa taught you." "See you around, new kid," Blake laughed, deliberately stepping on Ethan's math worksheet as he walked away. This became the pattern of Ethan's first 2 weeks at Westlake. Blake and his friends seemed to materialize wherever Ethan went, knocking his lunch tray in the cafeteria, accidentally shoving him into lockers, making loud comments about his accent, which was barely noticeable, or his clothes or his solitary status. Ethan bore it silently, determined not to escalate things. Each night he would go to the garage of their new house, where his father had set up mats for him to train. There, alone, he would work through his forms, his movements fluid and confident in a way they never were at school. The discipline of jiu-jitsu centered him, helped him process the frustration and anger that built throughout the day. "You know you could end this," his father said one evening, watching from the doorway as Ethan executed a perfect shoulder throw against an imaginary opponent. "That's not what you and Grandpa taught me," Ethan replied, breathing steadily as he moved into the next sequence. "Jiu-jitsu is for protection, not aggression." His father nodded, pride and concern mingling in his expression. "True, but there's a difference between starting a fight and finishing one." Ethan just shook his head and continued his training. By the 3rd week, Blake had grown bolder, perhaps interpreting Ethan's restraint as weakness or fear. The cafeteria became a particular zone of danger, with Blake and his friends claiming a table near the entrance where they could easily intercept Ethan. "Hey, Jackie Chan, come sit with us," Blake called out one Tuesday, causing several nearby tables to snicker. Ethan tightened his grip on his lunch tray but kept walking, aiming for an empty table in the corner. "I said, come here," Blake's voice hardened, and suddenly he was standing, moving to block Ethan's path. "Please just let me pass," Ethan said, trying to step around. Blake's foot shot out, catching Ethan's ankle. In an instant, Ethan felt himself falling forward. For a split second, muscle memory from countless training sessions almost kicked in, the instinct to convert the fall into a roll, to recover his balance with practiced ease, but surrounded by watching eyes, Ethan suppressed the instinct. He fell hard, his lunch tray clattering to the ground, spaghetti and sauce splattering across his jeans and the floor. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Even the lunch staff just shook their heads, one grabbing a mop with a resigned expression that suggested this was nothing new. "Oops," Blake said, towering over Ethan. "You should really watch where you're going." Ethan picked himself up slowly, sauce dripping from his favorite hoodie. For the first time, he met Blake's eyes directly. Something in his gaze, some hint of the steel beneath his quiet exterior, made Blake blink in momentary confusion. But the moment passed and Blake's smirk returned. "What? You gonna cry about it?" Ethan said nothing. He simply turned and walked out of the cafeteria, back straight, despite the laughter following him. In the bathroom, as he tried to clean spaghetti sauce from his clothes with paper towels, Ethan stared at his reflection. "How long are you going to let this continue?" His reflection seemed to ask, "What would Grandpa say if he saw you now?" For the first time since arriving at Westlake, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Not anger. He'd been trained too well to let anger take control, but resolve. A decision crystallizing with each dab of the paper towel against the stained fabric. The next morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. He went to the garage and trained with an intensity he hadn't felt in weeks. His movements were sharp, focused, deliberate. When he finally stopped, sweat dripping from his forehead, he felt centered in a way he hadn't since the move. At school, he walked differently, still quiet, still unassuming, but with a subtle change in his posture. His shoulders were no longer hunched, his eyes no longer downcast. He moved with the fluid grace that came from years of training, no longer hiding it beneath artificial awkwardness. In English class, Lily Torres, a girl who had occasionally smiled sympathetically at Ethan but never spoken to him, leaned over from the desk beside his. "Something's different about you today," she said, her head tilted curiously. Ethan just smiled slightly. "Good different or bad different?" "Good," she decided after a moment. "Definitely good." The confrontation, when it finally came, wasn't in the cafeteria as Ethan had half expected. It happened in the gym after school. Ethan had stayed late using the weight room with permission from Coach Daniels, who seemed pleased that the quiet new kid was showing interest in physical fitness. Ethan was just finishing his routine when Blake and his friends sauntered in, apparently having finished wrestling practice. "Well, look who it is," Blake called out, nudging Trent. "China boy thinks he's an athlete now." Ethan calmly put down the weights he'd been using and began wiping them down with a towel, as was proper gym etiquette. "What are you doing in here anyway?" Blake continued, moving closer. "This isn't the math club, you know." "Just working." "Hout," Ethan replied evenly, meeting Blake's gaze without hesitation. "I'm done now, you guys can have the space." Something about Ethan's calm demeanor seemed to irritate Blake more than any response could have. He stepped directly into Ethan's path as Ethan tried to leave. "I don't think we're done here," Blake said, giving Ethan a shove that was meant to send him stumbling backward. Only Ethan didn't stumble. He absorbed the push with a slight adjustment of his stance, his body automatically finding its balance as it had been trained to do through thousands of repetitions. Blake's eyes narrowed. "What's that? You think you're tough now?" "I don't want any trouble," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "Please let me pass. You hear that?" Blake looked back at his friends, who had formed a loose semicircle. "He doesn't want trouble." He turned back to Ethan with a sneer. "Too bad. You've got it." Blake lunged forward, grabbing for Ethan's shirt with both hands, a classic Bullies move designed to establish dominance through superior size and strength. In a motion so smooth it appeared almost casual, Ethan sidestepped the grab, simultaneously catching Blake's right wrist and forearm. Using Blake's own momentum, Ethan executed a basic Jiu-Jitsu redirection, guiding Blake's body past him and gently but firmly bringing the larger boy to the mat with a controlled sweep of his leg. Blake hit the mat with a surprised grunt, more shocked than hurt. Before he could react, Ethan had established a simple control position, not painful or dangerous, but completely effective at neutralizing Blake's strength advantage. What the actual? Blake struggled against the hold, his face reddening with effort and embarrassment. "I'd stop moving if I were you," Ethan advised calmly. "The more you struggle, the more energy you waste." The gym had gone silent. Trent and Cooper stood frozen, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion. From The corner of his eye, Ethan could see other students gathering at the gym doors, phones out recording the unexpected scene. "Get him off me!" Blake shouted at his friends, who exchanged uncertain glances, but made no move to approach. "I'm going to let you up now," Ethan said, his voice steady, "and then I'm going to walk away. This ends here, Blake. I don't want to be your enemy, but I won't be your victim anymore either." With that, Ethan released the hold and stood in one fluid motion, stepping back to give Blake space. Blake scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with humiliation. For a moment it seemed like he might lunge at Ethan again, but something in Ethan's stance, in the quiet confidence of his posture, made Blake hesitate. "Who the hell are you?" Blake demanded. "Just the new kid," Ethan replied with a slight shrug, "who happens to be a national junior jiu-jitsu champion." He turned to walk away, then paused and looked back. "You should ice that wrist. I tried to be gentle, but you were fighting pretty hard." The videos of the gym confrontation spread through Westlake High with the speed only high school gossip can achieve. By the next morning, Ethan's phone was buzzing with friend requests and follow notifications from classmates who had never given him a second glance before. The hallways felt different as Ethan walked through them that day. Students who had previously looked through him now nodded in greeting. A few even approached to ask about jiu-jitsu, expressing genuine interest rather than mockery. Blake and his friends were conspicuously subdued. They didn't approach Ethan, didn't even look in his direction when they passed in the hallway. The bubble of fear and intimidation they had cultivated seemed to have popped overnight. Lily caught up with Ethan between classes, falling into step beside him. "So that's what was different," she said with a knowing smile. "Why didn't you tell anyone you were basically a ninja?" Ethan laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that surprised even him. "Not a ninja. Jiu-Jitsu is about control and discipline, not aggression. I never wanted to use it like that." "Well, half the school is calling you the Gentle Destroyer now," Lily informed him with a grin. "There's even a hashtag." Ethan groaned, but there was no real discomfort behind it. For the first time since arriving at Westlake, he felt like himself, not hiding, not diminishing, just being. It was after school, nearly a week later, when Blake approached Ethan at his locker. He was alone, without his usual backup, and there was an unfamiliar hesitancy in his posture. "Hey," Blake said awkwardly. Ethan nodded in acknowledgement, but remained alert, unsure of Blake's intentions. Blake rubbed the back of his neck, struggling with words that clearly didn't come easily to him. "That thing you did in the gym, would you maybe show me how to do that sometime?" It wasn't quite an apology, but in the complex social hierarchy of high school, it was perhaps something more significant, an admission of respect. Ethan considered the request for a moment, then nodded. "Sure, the gym has those mats in the corner. I could show you some basics after school tomorrow if you want." "Yeah," Blake said, relief evident in his voice. "That'd be cool." As Blake walked away, Ethan felt a sense of balance that went beyond the physical discipline he'd trained in for years. Standing up for himself hadn't been about humiliating Blake or claiming his position in some social hierarchy. It had been about establishing boundaries, about refusing to be defined by someone else's perception. That evening, as Ethan trained in the garage, his father leaned against the doorframe watching him. "I got a call from your principal today," his father said, his expression unreadable. Ethan paused mid-form, apprehension flickering across his face. But his father's stern expression melted into a proud smile. "He wanted to know if you'd be interested in starting a jiu-jitsu club at school. Apparently there's been quite a bit of interest." Ethan couldn't help but smile. "I might be," he admitted. "You know what your grandfather always says," his father reminded him. Ethan nodded, completing the familiar saying, "The true strength of jiu-jitsu lies not in defeating others, but in mastering yourself." As he resumed his training, moving through the familiar forms with practiced precision, Ethan felt a sense of wholeness he hadn't experienced since before the move. He was no longer the quiet new kid or the gentle destroyer of high school legend. He was simply Ethan Chen, all of his parts finally integrated, no longer hiding the strength that had always been within him.